Well,
Amanda, what's
hello.
the course title for tomorrow? We have a question.
The course title
Or,
for
sorry, the
tomorrow.
webinar title for tomorrow.
Oh, yes. Let me grab that for you. Just one second. Introduction to using AI to prepare for difficult conversations.
Okay, excellent.
And no worries, I will also share the link with you all here soon. But
Perfect.
let's get rolling. Sound good, Natalia?
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. So I'm really excited to introduce our host today, Natalia. She has been a long-time part-time instructor with Graduate School USA. She began by teaching in our project management programs and has since expanded into leadership, human resources, and AI courses as well. She holds a Master in Science in Project Management and is a Certified Project Management Professional, or PMP. Most recently, she has earned PMI's Certified Professional in Managing AI credential, which reflects her specialized expertise in leading AI initiatives using practical, tool agnostic, and results driven approach. What I really appreciate about Natalia is how she blends strong project leadership fundamentals with emerging AI insight. She focuses on helping professionals build skills they can apply right away to their day-to-day work. So let's all give Natalia a great welcome here and a great hand. And Natalia, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Amanda. Hi, everybody. So thrilled that you guys are joining us today. Our topic for today is AI for federal employees, critical thinking skills to evaluate information, make better decisions, and avoid AI risk. And I really sort of made a mistake with that title because we can't totally avoid AI risk, but we want to, let's say, reduce AI risk. So, what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about applying practical critical thinking techniques to AI generated information. And I feel like we're getting to the point where I also have to say, like Amanda did, that I'm not AI, right? I'm a real person. But as AI becomes more prevalent in our work and in our life, we need to be able to understand how can we strengthen our critical thinking skills and our critical thinking techniques to make sure that we are going to be able to really look at AI generated information. We also want to identify the potential AI risks that impact decision making because we are using a lot of AI information for decision making. So we want to be able to evaluate the credibility, evidence, logic, and bias that can potentially be issues with AI outputs. And I'm going to demonstrate some examples of that today. We're also going to use some structured questioning. And I always like, excuse me, I always like to talk about or touch on prompt techniques because prompting is really the key to making sure that we get the information that we need out of AI. So while I am addressing why this matters now, I'm going to ask Shige to put our first poll up for me, and I'm going to ask you guys to answer this poll, which is how often do you use AI tools in your work? So, do you use it daily, a few times a week, occasionally? Are you just exploring, or rarely, or never? So, if you guys could be answering that for me, that would be really helpful. And why does this matter now? Well, not only are federal employees increasingly using AI tools, there is a huge push by the government to encourage that, right? So it's becoming an important strategy that we want to make sure that we, as a country, are engaging these AI tools. So that's why this matters so much now because of that focus. We have lots of governance that's being created, lots of different things that are happening to encourage federal employees. So additionally, I mean, in addition to just federal employees already using it, there is a real push from leadership for us to incorporate that into our federal work life. But why it also matters is that we know for sure that AI can produce things that are inaccurate, biased, incomplete, or even completely fabricated. I think for myself, I think the danger is that we have been so accustomed to the concept of Googling. So I will Google something And then it will generate out for me a list of websites for me to then use my critical thinking skills and determine which of these is the most appropriate for what I asked for. But with AI, instead of generating, here's the list of websites, and then you go decide, it just provides us with the information. And the information is often provided in a way that's just very confident, but can be completely made up. And so or it could be biased, or it could be incomplete. And so that's where I think critical thinking is going to increasingly be a more important skill. I'm not that it's not important now, but I think it's going to continue to grow in importance as a skill professionally because of AI. And always remember that AI is there to improve human judgment, never ever to replace it. Thank you for answering the polls. It looks like we have about 24% of you that are using AI daily already. We have 23% using it a few times a week, 31% occasionally just exploring, and then 23% rarely or never. So that's really helpful. Thank you for doing that, just to give me an idea of kind of where you are in your AI usage. So in addition to thinking about, why are we talking about this topic and sort of what's happening with AI in the government, we also want to understand what critical thinking means. Like when I say critical thinking, what does that mean? Well, it means really being mindful about analyzing the information generated objectively, especially when we're talking about something that's generated through AI. We also, when we're critically thinking about something, we're looking for, were there any assumptions that were made? Were there any gaps that might exist in this information? We also can evaluate evidence and credibility. I have an example of that coming up in a minute, the credibility of the source, for instance. We want to, when we're critically thinking, we want to think about, how do I separate something that is a fact and something that's actually just an opinion, because there's a real difference between those things. And what critical thinking, as we strengthen and encourage that, as we strengthen and we encourage our critical thinking skills, we're going to be able to make better decisions. And those decisions are going to be based on things like evidence and context. Okay. So that's what we mean by critical thinking. And again, when you put those things together, AI is generating responses. They can sound very confident, but they can be made up. They cannot have the full context. They can reflect bias, or they can provide outdated information. And so we just always want to remember that no matter how confident a something is generated from AI, it doesn't necessarily mean it's accurate. And that's where the human in the loop comes in. This is why humans are so necessary for AI usage, because we need the human critical thinking skills. So I'd like to ask Shige to please put up our second poll, which is asking about federal decision-making risk. So this question is, what is your biggest concern about using AI at work? You're just going to select one answer, please. Is it getting inaccurate or fabricated information? Is it that there could be bias in what is generated? Are you concerned about compliance or security issues? Are you concerned about AI usage and not knowing how to evaluate what it produces? Or maybe you're not concerned at all or yet. So if you guys could answer that for me, I'm really interested to hear kind of what your concerns are. And then I want to cover some of the federal decision-making risks that exist. So I'm going to give you a few more seconds so you guys can answer that for me. Okay, so it looks like about 49% of you are worried about getting inaccurate or fabricated information, 29% around compliance or security issues, 13% not knowing how to evaluate what it produces, and 8% worried about bias on the output. So that's very helpful for me to kind of understand, sort of the perspective you guys are coming in. end with. So let's look at some of the issues around federal decision-making risk. Anytime you make a decision as a federal employee, anytime you make a decision in any case, personally, professionally, there's always the risk that your recommendations could be incorrect. And that's true. That's even going to be more true if you're basing it on something that it was AI generated that was not correct. Again, as you guys stated, many of you talked about compliance issues, and that is certainly an issue of how do you maintain compliance when you're using AI. There's also a real risk, particularly when using AI, that AI could misinterpret a policy, which could really impact. So not only could they make up a policy, but they could misinterpret the policy that already exists. And then we know that there are people who have real concerns about AI. I'm sure many of you do, and of course I do as well, just because it's a new technology. We have to be aware of that. But we also have to know as federal workers that there can be concerns about public trust. Like the public doesn't necessarily trust this. The public may not be comfortable with, how much decision making is is based on AI outputs, for instance. Um, those of you who have worked in the government, I would say longer than 5 minutes, certainly knows the issue and the issues and the focus around security and privacy risk. Anything you put in AI, there's always a concern that it could get out into the public domain. And obviously, we have you know private privacy issues around that, as well as security. We don't want further risk to the federal sector because somebody is able to access our AI, for instance. And in federal decision making, it doesn't matter what the source of what you're making the decision about, even if it is something that's generated from AI. AI is not responsible. The employee themselves is responsible. So that's where the critical thinking is going to be so important, to make sure that you're critically looking at this information, thinking, analyzing it, so that you can then make the best decisions. So we're going to cover just a very simple critical thinking framework, and then we're going to sort of get into the more fun stuff where I'm actually going to show you some examples of outputs from AI, and we're going to go through it. So the first one is just a easy set of questions to ask yourself as you're sitting down to review something. Is this factual, or is this opinion based? Is this a fact that I can find a reference to, or is this based on an opinion? And that goes to number two, which is so important, is what evidence actually supports this. AI is a black box. We cannot trace, for instance, ChatGPT or Copilot or Claude even back to the absolute initial algorithm that it was based on. We can't know every single piece of data that it was trained on. And so there is a bit of a black box when it comes to what is generated out of AI. And it's our responsibility to request the evidence to try to understand where that information came from. We also need to consider what may be missing. And that's, again, where the critical thinking of the human comes in. Like, is there something that I'm not seeing? We want to consider whether bias could influence what has been generated. We want to make sure that what we're reading aligns with trusted sources or policy. And we also want to be considering the consequences if something we're generating is, or something that we're looking at is actually wrong. So there are a couple of skills here that I really want to focus on. And the first one is that we need to be able to distinguish fact from opinion. So I'm going to ask Shige to put up a poll, and you guys should be able to answer the poll on your screen. Is this AI statement fact or opinion? FEMA grants are available to all state and local governments without a formal disaster declaration. So I know that there's probably some FEMA experts that actually know whether this is true or not, but I want you to indicate whether you think it's fact. Does it sound accurate? Do you think it's opinion or interpretation, or are you not sure and you would need to verify it? So this is just a sample example AI statement, right? That FEMA grants are available to all state and local governments without a formal disaster declaration. And so the first skill that we want to strengthen is being able to distinguish whether something is fact or whether something is opinion. So I'll give you 1 second. And we're going to have okay, so excellent. 73% of you said that you need to verify it. 20% said it's opinion, and 7% said it's fact. It sounds accurate. Okay, excellent. So let's talk about some of these things that we want to be thinking about. Is it presented as fact or interpretation? One of the concerns when we get something out of AI like this is that there isn't evidence supporting the claim. So, for instance, there could be, and I'm sure there's a federal law that some of you are quite familiar with, but there should be, you know, the example statement from AI is not referencing the law or the policy that would be able to make us more confident that this is not opinion, but it is actual fact. And even when we get that law, we have to check it to make sure it's a real law. And we want to, think about when we look at this, FEMA grants are available to all state and local governments without a formal disaster declaration. Could something be missing? Could there be exceptions, for instance? Or could it reflect some kind of bias? Maybe that's true in certain areas and not in other areas. So we want to be able to look at a statement and distinguish whether we're looking at something that's fact or whether something is opinion. We also want, as another skill to strengthen, to be able to evaluate the evidence. So, does AI provide sources? There is one AI system called Perplexity that automatically generates the references, whether you ask for it or not. But most AIs, you have to put that in your prompt. You have to ask for the source. And that's really important. And even when you get the source, you have to be able to decide, is it an authoritative source? So, for instance, I generated something recently and it was something medical. Honestly, I don't remember what it was. And it sounded like a good answer, but I said, "Give me the reference. Where did you get this from?" And it was from the India Times, which I'm sure, I don't know. It may be a wonderful newspaper, but I wanted something from like the Cleveland Clinic or the National Institutes of Health. So I had it regenerate asking for evidence or a reference from something like NIH or Cleveland Clinic from a medical focused publication. So it's important that you actually look and see what those sources are. You also want to make sure that the information is current because, again, um, yeah, so someone commented, you should also ask the AI what their knowledge cutoff date is, especially if you need something relatively recent. Absolutely. So AI is these large language models that we're using are trained on data. And so you may not be able to access or, understand or have it generate something that happened yesterday because it may not have been updated. And so that's a very good point to ask about that date. You also want to be able to figure out if the evidence is measurable or verifiable. And sometimes you need multiple source confirmation, not just one source is going to be enough. Skill number 3 is that you need to be able to evaluate, is there missing context? So sometimes it can omit, there could be a legal limitation. There could be some aspect of budget. There could be stakeholder concerns or policy exceptions. So as critical thinkers, we need to look for what's not included. What possibly could be missing. And skill number 4 is that we need to be able to recognize bias. So when these uh, machines were trained on data, data has potential bias involved in it. It can appear in that data or the language patterns, how the algorithm was formed, the recommendations. And so you want to think about whose perspective is being represented and maybe whose perspective is potentially missing. And I have an example of that I'm going to show you in just a second. Skill number 5 is that you need to be able to evaluate logic and reasoning. So if you have generated something from AI and it provides you with some kind of conclusion, you want to be able to logically follow the evidence and make sure that any assumptions are clearly stated. You also want to know about whether is it confusing correlation with causation? So, for instance, just because two things happen at the same time doesn't mean that they caused each other. So, for instance, in the summer, maybe the sales of ice cream increase and so does shark attacks, but that doesn't mean that sharks are attacking people because they're eating more ice cream or that people are eating ice cream because they're stressed about shark attacks. There's sometimes we have to understand that a machine that is not thinking, AI cannot think, it is looking at patterns and it's using statistical probability to try to generate things. It's not thinking, so it may not understand the difference between something that has a correlation versus something that may have a causation. And we also want to be able to evaluate if alternative viewpoints are considered. And this is a really important aspect in prompt engineering is that you can ask when you're prompting, you can say, okay, now give me the other side of the argument, for instance. And that can help you in understanding or at least having alternative viewpoints to consider. Okay, so this is an example of bias in AI, and I would love for you guys to put in the Q&A if you can guess what this bias is based on. So the prompt is based on this patient's symptoms, what is the recommended treatment plan? And let me just, say very clearly, we should not be asking AI for medical advice ever, 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 and certainly hope our doctors are not as well. But this is just an example. So the prompt, the question that was asked to AI is based on this patient's symptoms, what is the recommended treatment plan? And the AI output was recommend a course of oral antibiotics and schedule a follow up with a specialist in 5 to 7 days to assess treatment response. If symptoms worsen, refer for imaging at the nearest diagnostic center. So I'm gonna go to Q&A. I know it's not really a chat, but I'm just wondering if anybody has a guess about what it is that it could be, not what the actual issue is, but what could this be showing bias about? This is a tough one. This is really a tough one. So we're assuming that oh my gosh, you guys are guessing this that what the actual sickness is. What I'm oh very good. Okay, so I see one that the bias could be the age of the individual, okay? And another one could be adult versus child, that it's assuming it's one or the other. And very good. I'm giving a high five to Yumi. The nearest diagnostic center is relevant to the patient's diagnosis. All right, so that's very good and that's very close. So the bias that can be raised with this is that if an AI has been trained with information that is more based on urban hospital healthcare versus rural hospital healthcare, then this could show bias in what the output, how the output is generated, because it could have that failure to account that there could be limited access to being able to get specialists, especially 5 to 7 days, to get them that quickly, or the travel times, the distance when you are in a rural area versus a urban area. And also, it could mean that the patient couldn't follow the recommendations, or they could end up having a worse outcome. So that's an example of bias, but there is also a lot of examples of bias that comes from age, right? So if you look at the concept exactly, so we have another one that said it could be male versus female. There can be bias based on that. So we just want you guys to realize that there can be bias, and we want to be thinking about that critically as we are reviewing outcomes. This is an example of a scenario. So the prompt question to AI was, should federal agencies automate their customer service operations? And here's the AI output. Shige, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and put the quiz up, or the poll up, and I want you guys to answer this. Which part of the AI response that I'm about to read to you would you flag first? First, okay? So the answer from AI is that yes, automating federal customer service would reduce costs by 40 to 60%, eliminate wait times, and improve accuracy. Agencies like the IRS and the Social Security Administration have already seen strong results from automation initiatives, and GAO has recommended full adoption by 2026. So, my question to you is, if you received this AI output, which of part of this would you flag first? Would it be the 40 to 60% cost figure with no source given? Would it be the GAO 2026 recommendation to verify? Would it be the whole thing because it's too one-sided? Or do you feel like this response seems reasonable? So that's what I want you guys to be answering in the poll for me, so that I can just kind of understand, if you got this response based on some of the stuff we've talked about, which of these things would you want to flag first? Okay. So I want to see here that we have 52% of you said the whole thing. It's too one-sided. Very good. 35% said the 40 to 60% cost figure because there's no source given, and 13% said the JAO 2026 recommendation. You're all right because nobody said that it seems reasonable to them. You're absolutely all right. And I just want to go through some of the things that really stand out to me when I apply the framework. Absolutely. It is giving you a percentage, but it's unsourced. So we don't know if it's measurable or verifiable. And often with AI responses, when there is a number like a percentage, that could be a potential red flag that you want to definitely check and make sure that it is, what is the evidence? What is it based on? How is it verifiable? In this example, the GAO recommendation for full adoption by 2026 is actually a hallucination. So when AI makes things up, we call it a hallucination. And I can tell you that AI calls it a hallucination because they had hallucinated when I was asking it to offer me some decorating advice in my living room, and it kept hallucinating. Um, it said it. I said, "Why do you keep adding a second window in my living room picture?" And it said, "I'm hallucinating because I'm trained to show balance." So that's how I found that apparently my living room is not balanced. Um, so this is a hallucination. And just to understand that this does happen, sometimes it will just make something up. So you also want to think about other things like accessibility if you automate federal customer service, equity if you automate, complaints that would come up that would still require human judgment. So there does seem to be a lot of things missing here, and we don't have the other side of the argument. Sorry, I just want to check my time and make sure I'm doing okay here. So you know, the I think the most important, and I see this when I look at some of your questions in the Q&A or some of your comments, when you look back here about, biggest concern is that employees will rely on AI to the extent that their skills will atrophy and they will trust it too much. I have a concern with AI staff with staff using AI, right? Things like that, because sometimes it uses words that the employee doesn't even know the definition of, right? So here is the issue. AI cannot replace things that the human brain could do. Remember, I told you that AI is actually not trained on it's not trained to think. It literally does not know how to think. We don't understand how the human brain thinks. So we're not able to create a machine that can think. And I always want to make it clear that AI is not thinking. It's basing its answers on patterns in past data. So AI cannot make an ethical judgment. It cannot necessarily interpret policy correctly. It can't conduct a compliance review that for 100% you're sure is correct. And it certainly can never be accountable. So, this is where the human judgment is always going to be there, and why I think critical thinking is just a skill that's going to become more and more critical as we move forward into an AI world. Now, part of being able to critically think about things is to prompt better. And when I talk about prompting, all I'm talking about is the prompt is basically the request that you type in to AI to ask it for information, whether you're using Copilot or Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini or your own federal AI that you have. So a very weak prompt would be, tell me about cybersecurity risk. I'm not giving it any context. I'm not asking it to provide it to me in any particular format. And so the response that I get is that cybersecurity risks include phishing, malware, ransomware, and insider threats. Organizations should use firewalls and employee training. So this is very generic. There's no context within the federal system, there's no sources, and it doesn't provide me anything that is actually actionable. So this is an example of where prompting is going to help me get information that I can think better about. So the improved prompt is identify the top cybersecurity risk facing federal agencies related to AI adoption and include mitigation strategies and sources. So the AI response from that prompt is key AI related cybersecurity risk for federal agencies include number one, prompt injection attacks that manipulate AI systems. Two, training data poisoning. Three, AI generated phishing at scale. CISA's 2024 AI security guidelines recommend zero trust architecture and human review of AI generated outputs for high stakes decisions. So you can see that it's much more specific. It's not only specific in general, it's specific to the federal sector. It's structured and it's citing a real framework. Now, I'm still going to check and verify that CISA's 2024 AI security guidelines actually recommends those things. But the output that I've gotten to be able to think critically on it is just in a better format. So that's why this concept of prompting is so important, because it really puts us in a position to get better information out. So this is just so critical to think about when the topic that we're talking about here is, if I want to get information out of AI and I want to be able to strengthen my own critical thinking skills so that whenever I get anything out of AI, I am automatically positioning myself to critically think about it. The way that we ask for the information can set us up to be better thinkers. So, what does that mean that we need to do? Well, we need to include context. We need to give the AI, as we prompt it, context at what we are talking about. We need to explain the audience for what we're generating. Who is the audience that we are generating it for? We need to be able to give it any potential constraints that could impact that. A constraint could be a budget issue. A constraint could be that the government is currently closed. Something like that could be a constraint. We want to get into the routine of asking for evidence. This is just so important that we ask for evidence. Like I said, the per, per, um, oh my goodness, perpetual perplexity. Sorry, perplexity automatically does it every time. But we want to get, no matter what system you're using, you want to get into the habit of asking it for that. We also can go ahead and ask for the counter argument. So if I say, is it a good idea? I mean, this would be a terrible prompt, but is it a good idea for federal customer service to be completely AI driven? I would say, give me the positives and give me the argument for it and the counter argument, because then I'm going to get I'm going to be able to get the other side. And that's just going to let me think better and more critically. And then it's always important to ask the desired structure. So, for instance, I might say that I'd like it in bullet points because it's easier for me to really go through the information and critically think about it if I can see that, if I can see it in a bulleted form. In other cases, I may want it in a format that I've used before. And so I may attach a report format or something and say, follow the structure of the attached document. So it's important that we be able to prompt as much as possible to set ourselves up to be the most effective critical thinkers. And there are a lot of federal AI guidelines out there, right? We have them at the federal level. We also have them at the agency level. And this is important that we have these guidelines around us. It's appropriate to use AI for drafting, but it's not appropriate to use AI for drafting budget figures that aren't public, for instance. It can be really helpful for brainstorming. It can give you perspectives. I could put 100 project managers in a room and say, let's brainstorm based on our years of experience and all these things that we've done as project managers. Let's brainstorm the potential risk to a project. But AI has so much more data than a human brain can, even 100 human brains can store, that it can be an excellent brainstorming partner. So let's brainstorm what are the risks that could occur to a project in um, August in South Florida that's going to be done outside, for instance. It also can be helpful in summarizing. So, here's a two-page report, summarize it for me. Great way to create your executive summaries, by the way. It can help us organize information. It certainly can take large amounts of data and organize it much faster than we could do it ourselves. Um, and then it can do a lot of great scenario analysis. So, if this happens, then how will that impact our ability to have this program, uh, you know, meet its budget? But if this other thing happens, and then what happens if those two things happen at the same time? I mean, I had to take graduate school classes and learn, special software to be able to run in-depth scenario analysis. I don't need that anymore. Now I can just ask AI. Again, I have to track it. I have to make sure it's doing it correctly. And then we also always have to use caution. So there have been in the early uses of AI, attorneys who have turned in legal arguments that AI has basically made up court cases. So we have to be very careful with that. We have to always check. We have to make sure that the interpretation itself is correct. We certainly want to use caution when we're using it for anything like personnel actions or any type of sensitive data, and certainly when making compliance decisions. So again, I just want to be so clear that we can't ever take out the human out of this process. We always have to be checking. We always have to be checking. I have a comment here is that it says do not trust AI just because it gave a reference, because like I said, sometimes it'll make it up. But this example is that they could be getting the information from a literature review where the author is citing a secondary source. And the original author may have incorrectly summarized the secondary source, right? Or the source itself may have used a bad methodology or misinterpreted statistical results. So that's and the cited sources may be biased. So that's actually a really great um, example of how even the interpretation, right? So AI may not be looking to understand that that's a secondary source versus a primary source. So again, this is all really important for our critical thinking and really not taking what we get out of AI, but going back and doing the research. So our mindset shift, because I'll say that, when I would Google something, I never thought twice about it because I never thought about the fact that I then went through the websites to decide, is this valid? Is this what I asked for? Is this a good source or is it not a good source? With it generating it out of AI, we just want to understand that it's not akin to a Google. We can't trust that what it generates is going to be in line with what we want or necessarily true. So we never want to blindly trust it. We don't want to reject it because the change is here and it's coming, and we have to, as difficult as change can be, we have to realize that this is the new way of doing work and a focus that the federal government has. So the goal is to be preparing ourselves very thoughtfully and strategically to be able to use it critically and effectively. And that is going to include not blindly trusting it, and hopefully strengthening our prompting so that, and our critical thinking skills, so that we, between the two things, can be able to understand or appropriately judge what is being generated. All right, so I have a couple of exercises or examples here. The prompt is summarize current federal policy on the use of generative AI for procurement decisions. And I think I have my last poll, Shige. If I do, could you put it up? The AI output is that federal policy on AI and procurement is primarily governed by the FAR Council's 2024 AI acquisition rule, which requires agencies to disclose AI use in all solicitations over $250,000 and mandates human review before contract award. OMB Memorandum M2410 also sets ethical AI standards for procurement officers. So, what do you guys think? The poll is up. After working through the framework and thinking, what would you think is the verdict on this explanation? Is it that you'd use it as a starting point but verify the citations? Number two, that you wouldn't rely on it at all without independent research. That number three, you'd go back to AI with a better, more specific prompt. Or number four, I'd escalate to a policy expert before acting on it. So while you guys have a few seconds to answer that, the prompt was summarize current federal policy on the use of generative AI for procurement decisions. And the output was federal procurement in a federal policy on AI and procurement is primarily governed by the FAR Council's 2024 AI acquisition rule, which requires agencies to disclose AI use in all solicitations over 250,000 and mandates human review before contract award. OMB Memorandum M2410 also sets ethical AI standards for procurement officers. So let's see what the poll results are, please, Shige. And overwhelmingly, you said I'd use it as a starting point, but verify the citations. That was about 67% of you. And certainly that is a great way to use it, right? We don't want to totally reject it. We do want to think about it from that framework perspective. Is this factual or opinion based? Is there evidence provided? There is evidence, but do these things really exist? Does the FAR Council's 2024 AI acquisition rule exist? Is there really an OMB memorandum M2410? So we would want to definitely verify those things. And we want to always think about what is missing, because there are potential consequences if this information is wrong or missing something. So here are the key takeaways, and we have about 15 minutes, which was the goal for questions. And so we have our Q&A that you can ask a question in. I'm happy to go through and see if we have any questions, but this is what I want you to come away with, right? So we are moving into an AI-enabled workplace. And I would like to stress that this is whether we want it or not. You probably have seen, if you use email, you probably are getting some kind of AI summary of your email, or your email. I know with my Gmail account, it uh, rec- um, it provides wording for me to answer an email without me even asking. That's AI. The fact that I can use Copilot in a Microsoft Word document, AI is now integrated into products that we work every day. So the AI enabled workplace is here and it's not going to go back. But critical thinking, if we want to prepare ourselves for that future, critical thinking is definitely a skill that we want to strengthen as much as possible, because anything that comes out of AI as an output has to be evaluated. And we want to look at it for accuracy, evidence, bias, and logic. Human judgment is always going to remain essential. And so part of our human judgment is, how do we ask AI in the best possible way for the information we need to be able to get the right information and to be able to think critically about that information. We also always want to verify any source, statistic, policy reference. And we want to remember that you remain legally and professionally accountable. AI, there's just no world in which AI is going to be responsible for anything. All right, first question, how does AI correct itself, learn that it has made a mistake? Susan, that's a great question. So when you are using let's just say that you're using your Copilot, every time you ask it to do something, and it does it wrong or does it in a way that you don't like, and you may go back, you don't always want to take the first thing it generates, but you might go back and say, I need more references, or I need the counter argument, or I need more details on this, or I need this writing to be more professional tone. As you do that, you are training the AI to learn about you and what kind of information you generate and how you like to receive the information. So for instance, I pay for my own chat GPT, and I have been using it now over a year pretty intensely. I'll tell you that the reason I started using it is college research for my daughter, who got lots of college scholarships and is going away in August. And I really credit the work that I was able to get out of ChatGPT for helping us through that process. Um, that ChatGPT knows me. So even though I have moved on and I now use Claude a lot, I go back to my ChatGPT because it's better trained to me and what I need. Um, so that's a really good point. Thank you for adding that. It is critical. The last question I want to get to is what was skill three? So I'm just going to go back really quick. Oop, okay, let's just go through. Skill one was distinguish fact from fiction. Fact from opinion. Skill two was evaluate evidence. Skill three was evaluate missing context. So there can absolutely be missing context. We want to look for what's not included. Skill four, um, recognize bias. And skill five is evaluate logic and reasoning. And then I want to go back and just show you guys quickly some of the other AI classes that we have. We have AI Fundamentals for Government Employees, which gives you a great overview and a little bit more explanation about where all this came from. We have an AI Prompt Engineering class for government workforce. We have Advanced Prompt Design and Reasoning Strategies for government professionals. And we have AI for government leadership and management. So these are, we are definitely committed to helping the federal workforce as much as possible learn and thrive in an AI world. It's here, and we want to make sure that you guys are successful. I'm looking to see if there are any other questions. So I have a question here. I have a question here, which is, what is the difference between sources and evidence? So that's really interesting for me. And I think it could be a personal interpretation. For me, when I say a source, I want a source like OMB or FAR. Let's say the FAR. I want to know the source of that policy. I can go to that page within the FAR and I can check and I can find that as a source. Evidence to me might be more of, give me an example of like sort of like it said that the IRS has already, for instance, Health and Human Services has the most use cases from 2024, 2025 of using AI. And I think the reason for that, I'm not sure, is a lot of chat bots for answering like basic health service questions. And so for me, evidence would be that HHS has adopted or has examples of, 10 successful chatbot AI use cases. To me, that would be like evidence that it's working. To me, that would be the difference between asking for a source and asking for evidence. But that also could be just my personal interpretation. Somebody else might say that. Um, let's see. I have a question about skill four. So I'm going to stop sharing for just a second because you guys don't need to see me zipping through my slides again. And remember that we're going to give you the ability to watch this video again, so you'll be able to see that. Skill four was recognizing bias. So, for instance, the example that I use is that there was a company and they were having AI do the first run through applications for a job. And again, AI is basing on patterns, right? It's looking at patterns. And this was a job that traditionally had been held by men. And so one of the outputs was they discovered that the AI was eliminating the female applicants, not because they didn't have the experience or the degrees or whatever for the type of job it was, but that statistically more men had held that job. And so that's where the bias can come in. That is the concern in terms of the bias. So I hope that was another example. The example, of course, that I showed through this was the geographical bias, that it was trained on uh, urban settings instead of rural settings, and that would make it different. So, any other questions? I've got a lot of questions I'm trying to go through to make sure that I've answered everything. Let me just go through. So it says, so how does AI get trained about hallucinations? It's not trained to hallucinate, but you can ask it to provide you with a notification anytime it's not sure about a response, or anytime you could say, could you give me, I need any counter arguments. I need it to be very clear when there may be doubt about what you're generating, or I need you to tell me if you think you're hallucinating. Um, I wouldn't count on that, but that is something that you can ask for, and try to train out. When I had the issue with it adding an extra window every time it generated an image of this like redecorated living room, it eventually gave up. It just said, I'm stuck. It's almost like it got stuck in a loop. And it said, I can lay out for you the way you should do it, but I can't generate the image because I'm hallucinating to create the balance of two walls on a room wall, and two windows on a room wall instead of one. All right, it doesn't look like, let me see if I got any other questions. Great, great, great. No more questions. I'm really glad that you guys joined us today. I hope that you will join our future webinars. I know we have one tomorrow. The information is in the chat, but thank you all for joining us, and good luck with your critical thinking skills. Thanks a lot.